My grandson slipped me a note during dinner last Tuesday. His hands were shaking as he passed it under the table. Grandpa, it said, check the storage unit Dad rented last month. Unit 247. The code is Mom's birthday, backwards. You need to see what's inside before Friday. I looked up at him, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared down at his plate while his stepmother Emily kept talking about her shopping trip like nothing was wrong. That's when I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. Let me explain. My name is Henry, and I'm 67 years old. I live in a quiet neighborhood in Des Moines, Iowa. 3 years ago, my wife Margaret passed away after a long fight with cancer. It shattered our entire family, especially our son Daniel. He was 42 when he lost his mother, and he took it harder than any of us. Margaret was the glue that held us together. About 18 months after she died, Daniel met Emily at a charity event his company sponsored. She was 38, attractive, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in him. They got married after dating for only 7 months. Too fast, I thought, but Daniel was lonely. His first marriage had ended badly 10 years earlier, and he'd been single ever since. He has a son from that marriage, my grandson, Lucas, who's 15 now. Lucas splits his time between his mother's place in Madison and Daniel's house here in Des Moines. When Emily came into our lives, Lucas seemed happy at first. He told me his dad was smiling again, laughing more. I felt relieved. I thought maybe this woman was exactly what Daniel needed. Emily was sweet to me too. She called me Dad, brought over homemade food, asked about my woodworking projects. She seemed perfect, but about 6 months ago, things started to change. Daniel looked exhausted all the time. He lost weight, dark circles forming under his eyes. When I asked him about it, he said work was stressful. His accounting firm was going through a merger, which made sense at first. Still, I noticed other things. He seemed confused, forgetful. He repeated himself in conversations. Once, he couldn't remember where he'd parked his car at the grocery store. Daniel had always been sharp. This wasn't like him at all. Lucas noticed it too. During his visits, I could see the worry in the boy's eyes. He watched his father closely, studying him when Daniel wasn't paying attention. But whenever I tried to talk to Lucas about it, he shut down and said everything was fine, just normal teenage stuff. Then came that dinner last Tuesday. Emily invited me over for what she called a family meal. She made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the whole spread. Daniel barely touched his food, just pushed it around his plate, his movements slow and uncertain. Emily kept placing her hand on his arm, saying things like, "You need to eat, honey. Keep your strength up." Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. That was when Lucas passed me the note. I waited until I got home before I really processed what it meant. My grandson was asking me to break into a storage unit to spy on his own father and stepmother. The code was Emily's birthday, reversed. How did Lucas even know about this unit, and what could possibly be inside that made him risk getting caught? I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about my son's declining health, thinking about Lucas's frightened eyes, thinking about Emily's perfectly rehearsed smile. Wednesday morning, I drove to the storage facility off Hickman Road. It was one of those large, impersonal places with endless rows of orange doors. I found Unit 247 on the second floor. My heart was pounding as I entered the code, 421987. The lock clicked open. Inside, the unit was mostly empty, except for 3 cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The first box was filled with files and legal documents. As I started reading, my blood went cold. There was a new will, Daniel's will, dated just 2 months earlier. Everything was left to Emily, the house, the investments, the life insurance, his share of the accounting firm, everything. There was no mention of Lucas at all. My grandson, Daniel's only child, had been completely written out. That alone was horrifying, but it wasn't the worst part. The signature at the bottom looked like Daniel's handwriting, but something was off. The letter T was wrong. Daniel always looped his T in a very specific way, a habit he'd picked up from his mother. This signature was close, but not right. I'd known my son for 67 years. I knew the difference. The second box made my hands shake. Inside were medical supplies, syringes, bottles of medication I didn't recognize, latex gloves, and a small notebook filled with handwritten entries. I flipped through it, my stomach turning. The entries went back 4 months, each one listing dosages, times, and effects. Increased confusion, speech slightly slurred, memory gaps worsening, forgot colleague's name at meeting, balance issues, nearly fell on stairs. Emily was keeping a log. She was documenting Daniel's decline because she was causing it. I picked up one of the medication bottles and searched the name on my phone. Scopolamine. In low doses, it's used for motion sickness. In higher doses, it causes confusion, memory loss, and cognitive impairment. In very high doses, it can be fatal. Sometimes it's called devil's breath. My son wasn't sick, he was being poisoned. The third box contained surveillance photos, pictures of my house from different angles, photos of me at the grocery store, at the hardware store, on my morning walks. There were printed copies of my bank statements, a floor plan of my house with certain rooms circled, my bedroom, my study, the places where I keep important documents. There was also a life insurance policy. My life insurance policy. I'd made Daniel the beneficiary years ago when Margaret was still alive. The policy was worth $500,000. Paper clipped to it was a sticky note with a single word written in neat feminine handwriting. Next, I nearly got sick right there in that storage unit. This wasn't just about Daniel's money. Emily was planning to kill my son, and then she was coming for me. I took pictures of everything with my phone, every document, every page of the notebook, every surveillance photo. Then I put everything back exactly as I found it. I had to think. If I went to the police right away, would this be enough? A suspicious will, some medication, a disturbing notebook. Emily could claim Daniel asked her to manage his prescriptions. She could say the notebook was for tracking symptoms for doctors. The will could have been signed during one of his confused moments. I needed more. I needed proof she was actively poisoning him. I needed her caught in the act. That evening, Lucas called me. We'd never spoken on the phone before. He always just texted. His voice was quiet and scared. "Did you go?" he asked. I said yes. "Did you see it?" I told him I saw everything. When I asked how he knew about the storage unit, he went quiet for a moment before admitting he'd followed her. While his dad was at work, she'd left the house with those boxes. He thought it was strange, so he followed her on his bike, watched which unit she used, then tried combinations until one worked. It was dangerous, but he said his dad was getting worse. He told me Daniel had collapsed in the kitchen the day before. Emily called 911, but by the time the ambulance arrived, she'd already cleaned up whatever he'd been drinking. The paramedics thought it might be a heart issue. Lucas knew better. He'd seen her putting things in his father's coffee. She thought he didn't notice. My 15-year-old grandson had figured out what was happening and had been living in fear, trying to protect his father. My heart broke for him. I told him, very carefully, not to eat or drink anything Emily prepared. Nothing at all. Make his own food. Get it from restaurants. Whatever he had to do. And don't let her know you're suspicious. Can you do that? I asked. Lucas hesitated, then said he'd already been doing that for weeks. I told him he was a good boy and that I was going to fix this, but I needed a few days. When I asked if he could hold on a little longer, his voice dropped. He told me Daniel's appointment with the heart specialist was on Friday. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He'd overheard Emily on the phone talking to her brother. She'd said Friday would be the perfect time because everyone would assume it was Daniel's heart. Friday was only 2 days away. Whatever Emily was planning, she was close to carrying it out. I spent all of Wednesday night researching, planning, thinking. I barely slept. Early Thursday morning, I called an old friend from the police force, Frank Miller. We'd known each other for over 40 years. He'd retired 5 years earlier, but still had connections. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said this was serious, but I was right to be cautious. Judges don't like speculation, even when it's logical. They want solid proof. Then he laid out a plan. It was risky and would require me to act better than I ever had in my life, but it might work. Later that morning, I called Emily and put on my best worried father voice. I told her I was concerned about Daniel, that he'd looked unwell at dinner, and that I was thinking of moving in for a short while to help out, make sure he was eating properly and getting enough rest. There was a pause. Then her voice turned syrupy sweet. She said it was thoughtful, but they were managing fine, that the doctor believed it was stress from work. I pushed gently, saying I was his father and wanted to help, that she shouldn't have to carry the burden alone. She resisted again, saying Daniel wouldn't want me disrupting my life. I let my voice wobble, told her I'd already lost Margaret and couldn't lose my son too. I said the house felt empty anyway. Another pause followed. I could almost hear her calculating. Finally, she agreed, saying it would be all right if it was only for a few days. I told her I'd pack a bag and come over that afternoon. When I arrived at Daniel and Emily's house, my son answered the door. He looked worse than he had on Tuesday. His skin had a grayish tint, and his hands trembled when he hugged me. He asked what I was doing there, and I told him his wife had invited me to help out while he wasn't feeling well. Emily appeared behind him, smiling brightly, welcoming me in and telling me she'd set up the guest room. Along with my clothes, I'd brought 3 tiny wireless cameras Frank had lent me, motion-activated and easy to hide. That evening, while Emily was making dinner and Daniel was resting upstairs, I placed the cameras. One went in the kitchen, hidden behind a cookbook stand with a clear view of the counter and coffee maker. One went in the dining room, tucked among decorative items on the hutch. The third I placed in the upstairs hallway, positioned to see the bedroom doors. Lucas knew I was there, but we'd agreed to act like we weren't coordinating. When he came down for dinner, he just nodded at me. I asked him about school, and he gave short, careful answers. Dinner was tense. Emily had made spaghetti and meatballs. I watched closely as she served everyone. Daniel's plate seemed to come from a different pot than mine and Lucas's. When Daniel wasn't looking, I saw her sprinkle something extra onto his pasta. If anyone had asked, she could have called it a spice, but I knew better. Daniel ate without interest, barely tasting his food. Lucas picked at his meal. I made polite conversation, complimented the cooking, and played the role of the grateful, oblivious father-in-law. After dinner, Daniel went upstairs to lie down. Emily told Lucas to work on his homework. Once we were alone, she made me tea. I watched her carefully. She didn't add anything to mine, just smiled and talked about how nice it was to have family around. She said Daniel was lucky to have a father who cared so much. I told her he was my only child, that after Margaret died, he was all I had left. I let emotion creep into my voice. I added, of course, that Lucas mattered too. She echoed it, but something flickered in her eyes. She commented on what a smart boy Lucas was, how he took after his father. Then she shifted the conversation. She said she'd been thinking about the future, far in the distance, of course, and asked if I'd made sure my paperwork was in order, so there wouldn't be any confusion when Daniel eventually inherited my estate. She said legal complications could be so stressful for families. It wasn't subtle at all. I told her everything was in order, that I'd updated my will the previous year with my lawyer, Susan Parker, and that everything went to Daniel, and if anything happened to him, it would all go to Lucas. Family first. Her smile tightened just slightly. That night, I lay in the guest room with my laptop, watching the camera feeds through the monitoring software Frank had set up. At 11:47 p.m., Emily appeared in the hallway, wearing a robe. She moved quietly down the stairs. I held my breath as the kitchen camera picked her up. She went straight to a cabinet above the refrigerator, the one where they kept things they rarely used. She took out a small bottle and a syringe. Then she prepared Daniel's coffee for the next morning, the special blend he drank every day. She added liquid from the bottle to the coffee grounds, measuring carefully. When she was done, she put everything away and went back upstairs. I finally had it. Video evidence of her tampering with Daniel's coffee. Frank had warned me not to confront her yet. We needed to catch her with the actual drugs and document everything properly for the police. The plan was for officers to arrive Friday morning with a warrant. Frank had already shared my photos from the storage unit with his former colleagues, and they were taking this seriously. Still, I couldn't let Daniel drink that coffee. At 6 o'clock Friday morning, I got up before anyone else, went downstairs, dumped the entire container of coffee grounds down the disposal, and replaced it with a fresh one from the pantry. When Emily came down half an hour later, I was sitting at the kitchen table reading the newspaper like I'd been up for hours. She greeted me and commented on how early I was up. I smiled and told her old habits die hard. I mentioned I'd made a fresh pot of coffee because Daniel's usual blend was empty, and I'd opened a new one. Her face froze for just a fraction of a second before the smile returned. "Oh, that's fine. Thank you." Daniel came downstairs around 7, looking worse than ever. He said he'd been vomiting during the night and still felt dizzy. Emily immediately switched into caring wife mode, touching his forehead and suggesting he skip work. I told him he should go to the hospital and have them run tests. Emily answered quickly, saying his appointment with the heart specialist was that afternoon at 2 and that we should wait. I pushed again, telling Daniel he looked terrible, but he insisted he was okay. His words were slightly slurred. Whatever she'd been giving him was already in his system from the day before. He said he just needed rest. Lucas came down for breakfast with his backpack on, ready for school, and looked at his father with open fear. Suddenly he said he didn't want to go to school and wanted to stay with his dad. Emily shut that down immediately, telling him he needed to go and that Daniel would be fine, that she'd take him to the appointment later. I offered to drive Daniel myself and suggested Emily stay home and rest. For a brief moment, anger flashed across her face before she smoothed it away. She said she needed to be there to explain Daniel's symptoms to the doctors. At 8:15 a.m., the doorbell rang. Emily went to answer it, and I heard surprise in her voice. A woman introduced herself as Detective Laura Simmons with the Des Moines Police Department, along with her partner, Detective Mark Reynolds. They had a warrant to search the house. I stood as 3 uniformed officers entered behind them. Emily's face drained of color. She demanded to know what this was about and insisted there must be a mistake. Detective Simmons held up the paperwork and calmly said there was no mistake. They had reason to believe evidence of a crime was on the premises, specifically medications and documents. Emily turned to Daniel, demanding he tell them to leave, but he looked confused and overwhelmed, barely able to follow what was happening. Lucas backed against the wall, eyes wide. I stepped forward and said I had information that might help. I explained that I'd been documenting evidence for the past few days and handed my phone to Detective Simmons, showing her the video footage from the kitchen camera. Emily spun toward me, accusing me of spying in her home. I told her I was protecting my son. They found everything. The bottle of scopolamine hidden in the cabinet, the syringes wrapped in a towel in the master bedroom, Emily's notebook, which she'd brought back from the storage unit, and even the contaminated coffee grounds in the garbage disposal. When officers searched the storage unit itself, they found all 3 boxes exactly as I'd documented them. Once Emily realized how much evidence they had, she started talking, not quite confessing, but trying to justify herself. She claimed Daniel was mentally unstable and that she'd been trying to help him. She said the will was legitimate and that he wanted to provide for her. She claimed the medication was prescribed, though she couldn't name a doctor. None of it held up. Forensics found her fingerprints on the forged will, along with her brother's. He was arrested the same day. It turned out he already had a record for fraud and forgery and had served time. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered Emily's past. 2 previous marriages. Both husbands had died, one from a heart attack, the other from an alleged accidental overdose. Neither death had been properly investigated at the time. Daniel was rushed to the hospital, where doctors confirmed scopolamine poisoning. They said if it had continued much longer, it could have caused permanent brain damage or killed him. He was placed on a detox protocol. It took 3 weeks before he was clear-headed enough to fully understand what had happened. Lucas stayed with me during that time. We turned my spare bedroom into his room, put up posters of his favorite bands, and got him a better desk for schoolwork. He was quiet at first, trying to process everything. Then one night at dinner, he broke down crying. He said he should have spoken up sooner, that he knew something was wrong but didn't know how to prove it and was afraid no one would believe him. He thought maybe he was imagining things. I held my grandson and told him he'd saved his father's life, that he'd been smart and brave, that finding the storage unit and warning me had made all the difference, and that he should never think he hadn't done enough. Daniel made a full recovery physically, but emotionally it took much longer. The betrayal cut deep. He'd loved Emily and trusted her completely, and learning she'd been slowly poisoning him for money was devastating. He went to therapy, and so did all of us. Family therapy and individual counseling. We needed it. The trial took place 8 months later. Emily was charged with attempted murder, fraud, forgery, and multiple additional counts. Her brother was charged as an accomplice. The evidence was overwhelming. The video footage, medical records, forged documents, and the notebook detailing her poisoning schedule. Prosecutors even exhumed her former husbands and found evidence of poisoning in both cases. Emily was sentenced to 25 years to life. Her brother received 15 years. The judge called it one of the most calculated and cold-blooded attempted murders he'd seen in his career. Daniel sold the house. There were too many memories there. He bought a smaller place not far from mine. Lucas decided to stay with us full-time instead of splitting time with his mother. He's 17 now, doing well in school and planning to study criminal justice in college. He says he wants to help people like his father, people who don't see the danger until it's almost too late. As for me, I learned two things I'll never forget. Trust your instincts, and always listen when the young people in your life are trying to tell you something. Lucas understood what was happening before any of us adults did, and his perspective turned out to be priceless. That taught me another lesson. Family doesn't always mean blood, and blood doesn't always mean real family. Emily was family on paper, but in reality, she was a predator. The family that truly matters is the one that shows up, protects you, and loves without conditions. I also learned that evil rarely looks evil. It often hides behind charm. Emily seemed perfect. She said the right things, acted supportive, and played her role flawlessly. She fooled everyone, including me, for months. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs I missed. The way she slowly isolated Daniel from friends, how she discouraged him from seeing doctors until she could control the story, how she kept pushing me to update my estate planning. At the time, none of it felt alarming because she was friendly, affectionate, and called me Dad. That's exactly what predators rely on. They count on our instinct to trust and our reluctance to believe someone close to us could be capable of something terrible. I often think about the men Emily killed before she ever got to Daniel. They must have had families too, people who loved them and mourned them, never knowing the truth. Their deaths were ruled natural causes or accidents, and the story ended there. If Lucas hadn't been observant, if he hadn't been brave enough to investigate and then trust me with what he found, Daniel would have been next. And after that, I believe I would have been next, and eventually Lucas as well. Emily wanted everything, and she was willing to eliminate anyone who stood in her way. Now, when I share this story, people ask how they can tell if someone is dangerous. The honest answer is that you can't always know for sure, but there are red flags. Moving too fast in relationships, isolating a partner from friends and family, showing unusual interest in money or inheritance, inconsistencies in personal stories, being charming in public but controlling in private. Most importantly, listen when someone vulnerable, especially a child, tries to tell you something is wrong. Lucas tried to warn me in the only way he knew how. He couldn't just say, "My stepmother is poisoning my father." He was a kid, and even to him that sounded unbelievable. Instead, he pointed me toward the truth. Children often notice what adults overlook because they aren't invested in keeping things comfortable or polite. They see what's happening and say it as they see it. These days, Daniel, Lucas, and I have dinner together every Sunday. We cook, share stories, and sometimes laugh about the good memories we still have of Patricia. Our family is smaller now, but it's stronger because we survived something terrible together. We don't take each other for granted anymore. Lucas graduates high school next year. Daniel has started dating again, slowly and carefully. I still spend my time in the garage working on my woodworking projects. Life is quiet, ordinary, and normal, and after everything we've been through, ordinary feels like a gift. I'm 68 now. Some people might think I was too old to play detective, to set up cameras and gather evidence. But age doesn't make you helpless. It makes you experienced. It teaches you to trust your instincts and recognize when something isn't right. If Patricia were still here, she'd say I did the right thing. She'd be proud of Lucas for his courage and grateful that Daniel survived. She'd probably scold me for putting myself in danger at my age, but she'd understand why I did it. Because family is everything, and you protect what you love, no matter the cost. On the day Emily was sentenced, Lucas asked me if I was glad it was over. I told him the truth. I'm glad she can't hurt anyone else. I'm glad Daniel is safe. I'm glad we're still here together. But I'll never be glad that any of this happened. I wish Daniel had never met her. I wish Lucas had never had to carry fear and suspicion alone. I wish I'd never had to watch my son slowly deteriorate or uncover the depths of someone's cruelty. But we don't get to choose what happens to us. We only get to choose how we respond. I choose gratitude. Gratitude that Lucas was brave. Gratitude that I trusted him. Gratitude that the police listened. Gratitude that Daniel survived. Gratitude for every quiet Sunday dinner and every peaceful moment. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about how close we came to losing everything. If Lucas had waited one more day, if I had dismissed him, if the police hadn't investigated, those thoughts still weigh on me. Then, morning comes. Lucas sends me a meme. Daniel calls to ask if I want to watch a hockey game. Life moves forward. We're here. We're safe. And we're together. That's what matters. Not the money Emily wanted, not the inheritance she was willing to kill for. Just this, a father, a son, and a grandson getting through another day together. Watch out for the people you love. Trust those who care enough to notice when something feels wrong. Don't ignore warning signs just because they seem unbelievable. Evil exists, and sometimes it smiles across the dinner table. But love exists too. Courage exists. Justice exists. And sometimes, when you're careful and brave, the good side wins. That's the lesson I want people to take from our story. Not fear, but awareness. Not suspicion, but attention. Because I'd rather be wrong and look foolish than be right and lose my son. That's what family means, and no amount of money is worth more than that.